I wanted to share an extra supplement to the Future Jam, a conversation I had with my brother-in-law, Harrison, about a very convoluted subject matter, the simulation hypothesis. We refer to it as a simulation theory within the discussion, and I wanted to briefly define it. The simulation hypothesis proposes that reality is in fact a simulation, most likely a computer simulation. Some versions rely on the development of a simulated reality, a proposed technology that would seem realistic enough to convince its inhabitants. Are we currently living in a simulation? Is it for the greater good to develop this technology for our future? And how does it relate to our spirituality? All that and more. Stay tuned. I'm Mike. Well, I mean, everybody knows that, so.
Everybody in the whole world.
Everybody in the whole world knows that. I'm here with Harrison. He's my brother-in-law, and we've kind of exchanged stories and ideas and thoughts on different things. But one of the more interesting ideas that he's like kind of talked about, and he's kind of passionate. You're kind of passionate about it a little bit. Is
I wouldn't say passionate, but I would say I spent a lot of time thinking about these sorts of things. I'm a trucker, and so I spent a lot of time thinking and like on my own, and just, I don't know. When you have a lot of time to think, you can think of some really weird things, some really interesting things. But this topic is one of them that I've thought about a lot.
And I'm not sure if that's bad or good, the amount of time you have to think.
It could be bad or good, yeah, for sure.
It could be bad or good. Not unclear. Unclear. So, I guess, how do we intro into it's kind of a weird topic to intro into it. So, do you want to kind of like warm the audience up a little bit? Like warm them up to the concept?
Sure. Yeah, so it is a weird concept, but being a trucker, I tend to look into conspiracies. There's a lot of conspiracy theorist types of people that are like, truckers and, those types of those guys that listen to talk radio and they're like, oh, the UFOs are all over the place. Anyway, just looking into that kind of stuff, trying to keep my mind occupied when I'm out on the road. You stumble across all kinds of things. And one of the theories that I just found most interesting is just the idea of the simulation theory. And as a lot of people were introduced to this idea from the movie The Matrix, it's been expanded upon as far as what that could mean. Like, are we living in a simulation now? People, you ask some people, they will say we are. I mean, those people are crazy nut bars, but some people would say that we are, and I don't believe that we're in the Matrix, but just the idea in itself is an interesting one, and in my opinion, it might actually be a necessary one in the future. And I feel like that's a unique take on this whole thing.
Okay, so everybody wants to, I guess, prolong their life, or everybody fears death. Everybody's really, really scared of dying. And I guess that's a big concept that's come up as of late is, I guess, Elon Musk and a bunch of other rich billionaires are trying to prolong their lives digitally.
So that is one of the aspects of the whole, digital side of things, but I almost feel like that is not the same thing as simulation theory. Like, I think that's a really interesting idea, and that actually might be some of the precursor technology that would allow for the fulfillment of the simulation type of stuff to happen. But it wouldn't be the same, because I feel like that's kind of more of like copying someone's personality and basically making a duplicate, a fake version of somebody, rather than actually allowing for someone to expand their life in some sort of eternal way.
Yeah, but wouldn't you need to get your brain and consciousness onto like a digital playing field in order for to even set up one of these simulations?
Possibly. So I know where you're coming from, but it may be more simple than that, because you kind of think about when you plug in a controller into a system, you integrate the technology of that peripheral into the system. So when you press a button, it translates what that button press means into the game, into what it means inside the game. So if you press X in a PlayStation game, that means you could jump in some games. If you press X in other games, maybe that means you're going to go faster in your car. There's so many different things. So when you download someone's personality, I feel like that's kind of like a copy. But what the technology that I'm kind of thinking of is being able to actually kind of intercept the electrical type of impulses that your mind uses to communicate, to translate into this other kind of simulation world.
No, so what you're explaining is not necessarily copying yourself over to a digital world. It's kind of like streaming. Your body and brain and mind, everything still exists in the real world, but you're kind of streaming your consciousness to the digital world.
Right.
Is that what you're...
Yeah. And that's not much different. That at that point, it's not that much different than in the movie The Matrix, because you see those guys like in their pods, and they got like the thing in their
the
spine,
the hardwire connection into the
it's
spine.
like it's a hardwired thing, and so like that makes sense. That's like a pretty basic thing to kind of understand, because I do think that humanity in all of this is like a super huge important part. Like everyone is different and they're unique. They have different things that they can bring to the table. But where I think things change as far as like my view on simulation theory and like how it could be used is the idea of using it as almost like a tutor or like a teaching tool. And so
like kind of like a simulator. So if you need to learn something in real world but without real world consequences.
Exactly. So, like right now, if you're trying to be a pilot, you're trying to be an airline pilot, you go into a simulator. Like
Yes.
It is, for all intensive purposes, a real airplane. Like you have like the screens that completely simulate the outside. You have all the cockpit, like the chairs and everything are exactly the same.
And it moves on hydraulics, so it gives you the motion feel as well.
Yeah, so in every way, your senses are tricked so that it gives you a safe place to screw up. So if you crash a simulator airplane, the whole thing doesn't blow up. You know what I mean?
I guess that would be very useful in certain fields. Like I could see the military using this because you don't die.
Exactly.
You can do all sorts of crazy training techniques and you don't die.
Now, here's where I think my theory is the most different from anyone I've ever heard of, is the idea of just this whole, like teaching thing. I mean, obviously that would be one of the first things that people would use it for, is like, let's do this in a safe way. Let's train our soldiers in a safe way. All this kind of stuff. But what's going to happen when our science and technology gets to such a point where we've been able to figure out what can stop, the cell death type of scenarios where, when cells replicate so many hundreds of times or thousands of times, they don't replicate the same anymore. Like those sorts of problems, little by little, over the next 100 years, 200 years, who knows how long it's going to take, they're going to figure that out. And then people are going to be living longer and longer and longer. And then pretty soon society is going to be so different that knowing the meaning of life is going to be so hard to find. Like right now, because we're so used to being mortal, and like every day we think about death, every day we think about, our dying grandma or our dying grandpa or whatever it is. It's such a part of us that we don't need that constant reminder. So in the future, it may be possible that death is such a insignificant part of society that it almost has to be taught to us. And in a such advanced society, like one of the criteria to entering it may be undergo what it's like to actually live a mortal life. And so you basically get born into the simulation, or maybe you opt into it, but you go in like and you start from scratch or whatever. I don't know. Those are small details we can figure out once the technology comes. But it will allow you to do the walk in a mile in their kind of shoe scenario and really learn what it's like to learn about life and its meaning in a context of it's not forever and you could lose it.
Kind of like the Sims game turned up to 1,000, where you're playing a character and you're like controlling every single little part of its life.
Well, what do you mean? Like there's like overseers kind of
no,
over you?
Like this, the Sims games where you're a character and you can control like what job you have, what school you go to, what furniture you buy. But more, you're actually that character. You can go in and experience somebody else's life instead of your own.
That could be one of the aspects or scenarios that could be used. Like for example, like what if in the future this technology comes through, instead of people being sentenced to 20 years in prison for such and such thing, what if they were sentenced to the simulation for 10 years or whatever it is, and they have to run through a scenario that is specifically tailored to help people come back from those sorts of like horrible crime sorts of issues? Like what if there's a guy, he's a perpetual thief, he finally gets caught enough times, they're like, okay, you got to enter the simulation, and the whole simulation is set up and completely tailored for him to learn not only what it's like to be stolen from. Like basically there might be like an implement where like basically everyone is constantly stealing from him, and then there'll be a secondary implementation where they teach him what he has to do in life to succeed without having to steal and having to rely on this. And all of these sorts of scenarios, people are allowed to make mistakes and are able to learn without completely, messing up the larger society.
So it's like a better rehab, like
right,
cleaning somebody's lives up and not just having them waste away in prison and
right,
not actually learning anything. They would actually go in and get real life,
definitely
experiences, real life. They live life properly, I guess.
Exactly. And if you think about it, it's so much safer to do it that way too. Like one of the biggest problems of prison is they basically say it's like college for criminals. Some people say that. Because you go in there and it's full of criminals. So you're either going to try to get on the straight and narrow, which, I mean, it happens. There's definitely people that do have a better experience once they come out. They learn their lessons. But a lot of people are like, I was going to be a criminal no matter what. I'm a professional criminal, and now I have all these other professional criminals in here. I'm going to learn from them, and I'm not going to learn to not get in trouble. I'm going to learn how to get in trouble and not get caught better. That's the kind of scenarios we're trying to avoid. And kind of going back to the whole idea of who can enter the simulation or why you enter the simulation. I was actually talking to my wife about this, and I like talking to her about this, even though she doesn't like talking about this. But she she brings up good scenarios of why this sounds like some sort of hell and how this could be such a horrible thing. And I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, it would be kind of crappy. But one of the things that she brought up is if someone is upon birth put into it directly and lives their life basically in this like incubator type of thing, once you get out, like once you learn the lessons of life, it's like, well, when you get out, then you're going to be like 45, 50, 100 years old. I mean, what's the point of that? You wasted 100 years. Well, I was thinking about this, and I don't know if anyone has watched some of the Black Mirror series on Netflix, but they get into some really cool, interesting, technological, in the future type of ideas. And one of their episodes actually gave me this idea, and it's the one where they're trying to get this guy to confess some sort of crime that he did. And they basically have him in this almost simulated world. But the thing that I thought was super unique about this scenario was they were also able to manipulate how you saw time. So they would like pan out into like the real world, and like 1 minute had passed when really inside that digital kind of dream world, it had been like 100 years or like something like silly. I don't know. You'd have to watch it again. But if you use that kind of idea, you can compact a baby's first year into an entire lifetime that we would experience here. And so that way you would have the best of both worlds, and you would have all these like genius babies too. So what's better than genius babies?
That is crazy. But how do they keep the bodies from atrophying, and how do they keep the babies and adults and everybody like healthy on the outside? Like wouldn't their bodies just waste away, just plugged in, laying there?
Well, and that's why this idea, I think, is actually one of the better ones. Because, I mean, unfortunately, we've had to get really good at taking care of babies that were born prematurely and born in very tough situations. And for the most part, like, babies can really be taken care of through the science that we've come up with in a way where, like, let's say, like, going back to the scenario I just brought up, you could probably, with the technology that we have right now, be able to keep a baby going for a year with what we have. And then you implement that, like, learning program, and then instead of the body having to be taken care of for, 100 years in some sort of weird incubator where, like, there's, like, shriveled up little raisin people, you have, like, a baby type of situation that is only being taken care of, for a year. And so in that time period, it's not, taking away from what the parents could do as far as being parents. They understand that if this doesn't happen, if the child isn't allowed to kind of go through these scenarios in a safe way, then they would do it in real life in a place where they really could get hurt. And not only that, everyone knows, like, peer pressure is a real thing. And, like, as much as we don't want to think about it, like, I've probably talked people into doing some stupid stuff. People have talked me into doing some stupid stuff. And so also kind of stamping down that kind of butterfly effect of bad kind of, scenario type of kind of things, I think this kind of technology would allow for as well.
Yeah, and I never thought of it as being used to teach children or teach criminals.
The biggest thing that my wife doesn't like about this is, like, so we're both really strong Christians, and she's worried that it takes away from religion and what, like, God has in store for us. And so I think the whole morality program, the idea of using this kind of technology to help people that are struggling morally, kind of thinking about that, it kind of gave me the framework of, not leaving God out of it, I guess. This isn't like we're in some sort of simulation and God doesn't exist sort of idea. So I wanted to be clear about that.
Well, I mean, right now we're just talking about if we can develop simulations, what we would use them for. And that's one of the concepts, is what can we do in the future. But I guess the other side of the coin would be, some people would argue we are actually living in a simulation right now. I don't know how. I don't know how that really fits in to the whole puzzle.
Right, and essentially you would never be able to find out. And it's kind of like a baby in the womb, that all they know is that womb. They don't know anything else. But then all of a sudden they're being born, and they're like, whoa, what is this? I'm in a whole nother scenario. So, like, this is where kind of like the technology side of things and like the whole simulation side of things and like religion and like faith kind of merge for me, because it's like, is this world kind of like the staging room for the next evolution of what our life has for us? Like, what if the whole stage of being in the womb is just preparing us for life? And then this life is just the staging room to prepare us for what's next. And if you're a person of faith like I am, I feel like it's preparing us for like an eternal life sort of thing. But that's where it gets a little tricky for me, because that almost sounds like this is less real than what could be next. And that's only one step away from this life being almost, in all instances, a sort of simulation to prepare you for the next stage of life. And that's where it gets a little weird too.
Yeah, but even if we were in a simulation, it wouldn't necessarily disprove God, quote unquote, because like a society much like our own could have put us into the simulation, and that society could have been created by God. So it doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't exist. It just means that the way we think of it changes the way we think about it a little bit. Like we're experiencing might not be real, but basically there's the creator, and then man, the creator, created the simulation that we're in. Mm-hmm. So you could still, it doesn't have to leave out God. God could still be the main creator, but as man, we want to create much like God creates. Mm-hmm. So we create our own civilization, much like God created civilization, or us. So it could be just us trying to be like God, and in our haughty nature, we create our own simulation, much like God created the earth. Or, that's
right. Yeah, I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily disprove God. It's just one of those things where it muddies the water a bit, but...
Well, see, this is where I think people would start saying, well, if we're in a simulation, then God doesn't exist, is because, like, if, in that kind of context, it would be kind of weird to implement so many different religions in a single simulation type of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, obviously I don't think we live in a simulation, but I'm just we're hypothetically speaking here. We're kind of imagining and just playing it out in our minds. But I think if we were in a simulation, whoever created the simulation would try to create as many distractions and as many things to keep us occupied as possible, so we wouldn't realize that we're in a simulation. So
that is part of it as well. And that kind of, the movie Dark City kind of touches upon that. You let me borrow that
yes.
movie. And basically, if you haven't seen this movie, these people are living in this basically it's like a snow globe. It's a city that you can't escape from, but nobody, like, everyone's kept so busy and like under control that no one looks to escape it. Like, it takes a few people to realize, oh, wait a minute, I can't leave this city. Wait a minute, what the heck? What is going on here? And so in that kind of situation, yeah, if this was a simulation, you would want to be distracted and stay busy and, allowed to, go here and there, but never feel like you're restricted. Because once you see a wall, you're like, well, what's behind the wall? I was like, well, now that you're behind the wall, it's like, okay, well, what's further than there? And then that's why, like the universe, it's like, well, it's never ending. It's like, well, you never can get to the end, so there's no wall to look behind.
And I guess they claim that there's going to be more and more there's going to need to be more and more distractions. Like there's going to need to be a ramp up. Like we get numb to a certain amount of distractions, and so they have to keep ramping up the distractions to keep us busy. So I guess that's one of their arguments why Donald Trump won the election. That's one of the arguments on why Donald Trump won the election. Or
we just needed some excitement to keep people distracted.
All these new technologies like smartphones, the internet, like it's endless amounts of distractions. And Netflix and all these different sources we have now to keep us from being pensive.
Right. And that kind of plays into the whole idea of allowing people to learn and actually live in their true nature. Because the thing is, the hardest part about this whole implementation is if we create these digital worlds, and the whole idea is to allow people to learn from them and actually truly learn from them and actually become this person that is morally better than they were before. You have to give them options. Like, for example, like I've heard this quote kind of thrown around before. Who's better at their diet? A person that is stranded on a desert island and refuses to eat cheesecake, or the person that lives in the city and refuses to eat cheesecake? If the person is never given the option, the person on the desert island, well, there's no cheesecake on a desert island. So yeah, good job on your diet. You're not eating cheesecake, but guess what? You don't have the opportunity to, where it takes a certain amount of
self-control.
Self-control to refuse cheesecake. And I think until people learn those lessons the hard way, a lot of times, you really don't learn that until you actually are faced with it. So it's like, are you going to, if you're hungry, are you going to beat up that person and take their money and, go and buy yourself something with that? Are you going to, if someone says, hey, I'll give you 50 grand to go, assassinate this person, it's like, in a way, that's why we have video games like Grand Theft Auto, because like those weirdos that want to play out those scenarios, they can in a safe place where they don't actually kill you. You know what I mean? So, but it's kind of like a Russian doll.
But it can also be used for evil. You can design simulations to try to rob banks the perfect way, or design simulations, all sorts of crazy simulations. I don't even want to go into it really, but
yeah, you don't want to give people like that ideas.
But yeah, you can pretty much design a simulation around any sort of concept you can think of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be used for good. And I guess it'll depend on who has control of the technology and who's going to properly utilize it. Because I assume it's going to take a lot of horsepower and energy to even run a simulation. So you'd assume that reputable companies and reputable...
Unfortunately, in those sorts of scenarios, there's always going to be a certain amount of influence from evil people that will use it for evil. And that's just, like, as of now, I mean, that's the only way we can really see it. But the thing that makes me a little bit, like, optimistic about it is the fact that for society to get to a point where technology like that is available, the amount of moral good in the world would have to be at a very high level for such cooperation of like people and businesses and whatnot. There's so much good in this world for the fact that there's so much highlighted about the bad. There's so much good in this world. I would say like 90% of people want to do good, are trying to learn how to do good, and are just, trying to do their best. But it's it's that like 10% of people that really, really can screw things up. So, I mean, we'll see as far as like the battle of morality goes, if we could ever get to a scenario like that, or are we going to blow ourselves up? Is North Korea going to go on a suicide mission, kamikaze style, and just, take everyone else out with them like they've said they would do, those kinds of things.
But yeah, you kind of explained how simulations could technically make things better. I guess the other thing we could think about would be mankind might be forced into the simulation because Earth really isn't livable anymore. And I guess they kind of explain that a little bit in the movies, the Matrix series, whereas the Earth's not really livable anymore. We have to create this simulation where we can actually enjoy life again.
Now, in that kind of scenario, I don't think people would want to put people in there because they need to fight the robots.
No, but the thing is the Earth was under robot control, but the Earth was also barely livable at all. So why would you even want to live outside the Matrix when it's that hellish? It's that hellish of an environment. The sky doesn't exist anymore. You have to live underground because of so much radiation. So what's the point of even living outside of the simulation if the Earth is barely livable?
Yeah,
Wouldn't
I
you-
see where you're going with that. I just think that in that kind of situation, it would be very cowardly to enter the simulation, and I think that you would have to rely on other people to keep that kind of powered up, so to speak. And in that kind of scenario, I'm sorry, but we don't care how comfortable you are. We're like in the real world, we're very uncomfortable because robots are coming to kill our entire city right now. So I'm sorry, we're gonna have to pull you out of this little fake matrix right now, so you can come out of your dream world with your.
Well, I'm hypothesizing that the robots don't exist. I'm saying.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just saying.
You're just saying, okay, like take the robots away.
Yeah, I'm just saying the Earth is the Earth is hellish. There's no reason to be outside of the Matrix because the Earth is
so like we like destroyed all of our like environment. And
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's hope it doesn't get to that.
But I'm just saying that might be a reason why we would go into a simulation.
That's
is
true.
Out of like desperation to leave like that type of life.
Yeah. Okay, I see where you're going.
A lifestyle kind of.
Like for somebody that is in like the third world, they like to watch TV of Western TV because it's like, oh, they can be taken out of their scenario for a little bit and see that, oh my gosh, it's so much better in other areas, and for like a period of time you feel better about your situation because you may not have to live like that forever. And if you do this, that, and the other, and if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, kind of thing, you can actually go on and do more than what you can. And so yeah, I see where you're going with it. I could definitely see that, but it would still, kind of going back to what I said earlier, require such an amount of moral good to even get to that point that I would hope that war would be completely kind of wiped out by that time, and balance would be restored as far as nature. And
But now, if you had the choice, would you rather live in this fake environment than live in a hellish environment that's real? Sure, it's real, but it's hellish.
for me, I would live in the hell, which is kind of weird because here's the thing. Like, I feel like I get drawn to video games the more comfortable I am. Like, I feel like there's like some sort of a chaotic side of myself where I'm like, yeah, things are too good. Like, I'm too happy. Everything's too good. I need to go into a video game where like bullets are flying at me 24/7, and these dragons are coming down to swoop in and like rip my head off. Yeah, give me a sword and a shield and let's go at this. So for me, if I was in that situation, I would definitely be living in the real world, because it's like there's got to be some people with the fortitude to be able to reestablish a civil society.
But you live in a house, right? With air conditioning and heat and a refrigerator and all that.
I'd give it up.
That's kind of like taking yourself out of the not hellish environment, but kind of taking yourself out of the environment of the earth. So the houses we've built, all these great inventions that we've created to make our lives easier, in a way, it's kind of removing ourselves from reality in a way.
But to a much smaller extent than completely separating.
Yeah, but like people live in Houston, Texas. That's like one of the hottest cities on the face of the earth. And
so wait a minute. Like, what are you getting at? Like, we should just like stop
I'm
using
just,
AC
I'm
and
just,
just tough it up.
I'm just saying, if you really want to live in reality.
Well, you know what? I don't have AC in my vehicle. I have
right.
I have a stick shift, and I don't have electric windows or anything like that.
Yeah.
So for the most part, in modern society, I have a iPhone, but it's a 4. Like, I'm gonna have to upgrade because I can't even get the charger anymore. So for that kind of situation, I do live pretty frugally and basic. And I just got back from a trip out hiking, so like I feel like I like those kinds of challenges. I almost froze to death one night when I was out on the truck because I didn't know how the heater worked and I didn't really care. And I woke up with my like breath, freezing, like the mist kind of thing. So, I mean, me personally, I'm just that kind of person. But I mean, I would see the benefit for other people to just be like, okay, I got to get away from the hell of real life. But I don't think it would be something like if we were really in that situation, it would be something not encouraged heavily.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I've been looking at is we're slowly integrating our brains with computers. Mm-hmm. We're slowly doing that. I think Elon Musk he announced a new company called Neuralink, and Neuralink, what they're going to do is slowly put pieces of computers in our brains. So we would interface ourselves with a computer, and it would help with dementia. It would help with a lot of these brain disorders or things that slowly go bad in your brain as you age. So Neuralink is it sounds kind of like that next step because simulation theory is our mind interfacing with a computer, and so they are kind of reversing it in a way where the computers are in our mind. But that sounds like it's the first step to what you're talking about.
Definitely. Like that kind of technology is huge for that kind of the simulation type of technology to happen. And they've been doing that for prosthetics for years, trying to figure out how they can, set up some sort of, microchip in your head so that you can use your mind to control an arm. And I don't know, did you see that video? I don't know, it came out like a couple of years ago. There's like a new technology that it's allowing blind people to see for the first time.
Yeah, I've seen
that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's kind of like the precursory for the simulation theory in a way. Like Facebook, they just announced that they're going to eventually be able to let you type with your brain. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's a step in the right direction. I'm not sure how. We're not very close at all, I don't believe. The closest thing we have right now is virtual reality. In virtual reality, you still know you're in. Like simulation theory, you have no idea you're in the simulation.
Yeah, I feel like for simulation theory, you have to have no idea.
And virtual reality is you still know that you're in a simulation. So virtual reality is goggles that you wear, and it's like almost like a 360-degree view in a way, whereas you turn your head, you can actually turn your head in the simulation and look around up and down, left and right, and you have some sort of, you have a controller and you can interact with your environment, but this is our first foray into this. It's gotten better. It's gotten a lot better over the years, but
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, technology is always going somewhere. I feel like we've just had so many breakthroughs for whatever reason. We've been able to establish consistency in cities and safety in cities to allow smart people to not have to worry about their physical well-being as much and actually be able to think about these big problems. And allowing for those things to flourish and thrive. And that's what is interesting about seeing where this is all going to go, because like we said earlier, I mean, a small portion of this is going to be used for bad. With computers, hacking came about, and they have to overcome that. So with more technology, there's going to be more problems. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to kind of see the development of all that and work out the security for all that, because oh my gosh, I mean, could you imagine, like you would have to buy like mind security, like some sort of like alarm system for your mind. It's like someone's trying to hack your mind. Like it's like, oh, like, do you want to allow access to such and such to your mind? It's like no, not this person, but yeah, if my wife wants to take over my mind for a little bit, yeah, sure, go for it.
And I guess simulation theory is a lot like dreaming, where when you're in a dream, you don't necessarily know you're in a dream. You think it's real sometimes.
Isn't that weird? Like, you'll just be in a dream, and when you think about it, when you wake up, you're like, obviously that was a dream, but when you're in it, it just feels so real. And so that's how, yeah, I agree. I feel like that's how it would feel in that sort of situation. It'd feel too real to question.
And I guess if you've seen the movie Inception, that's kind of the idea of people going into other people's dreams and stealing information from them or convincing them of something. So you would need that type of protection if there's a simulation theory. So you're talking about needing some sort of security measures, and that movie kind of demonstrates the security measures you would need and the reasons why you would need them. But it's a dream sequence. You can kind of interchange it a little bit. Dream, simulation. You know, dreams basically a simulation that's in our own brain.
Definitely.
So,
well, and that's what's so weird. If you actually get down to the science and biology of just what we see, I mean, really what we see is just chemicals interacting with different receptors and whatnot in our mind. So what's to say that those can't be interfaced with and understood better to create different sorts of scenarios? You know, I mean, it's like the more we understand that, it could be for a much greater good and for some really scary stuff too.
I think we've covered most of the gambit of this. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to talk about as far as the simulation theory goes, or?
I guess for me, I find it interesting because, like, going back to like the Bible, there's like a story of this guy named Enoch, and he was around when Noah was around, and in the Bible it says basically Noah and Enoch were the only righteous people around. Everyone else was just, you know, living so chaotically and violently and horribly and evilly that they were the only two people that like were civilized. And Noah stayed back to build the ark and like kind of reset society, but Enoch was pulled out, and it says in the Bible he did not taste death. And so it's one of those things that makes me think, like, that's kind of one of those weird things that makes me wonder how close is the link to us and like being in a simulation, or us into like the eternal life, you know, kind of spiritual realm. And if that's the case, if there's a chance that we live such good lives that we can be pulled out directly from here and be like, well, you know, in that kind of scenario, like, you wouldn't know if you were in a simulation. It's all designed to test you to make sure you could even live in a civilized society. If all your lessons were learned earlier than the 100 years allotted in like the simulation or whatever, who knows? Maybe you could just like be pulled out early. So
you're thinking that this technically it could be like a test to see if you're worthy of the next level or
something like that, yeah.
Worthy of like the next life in a way?
Almost, yeah.
Okay.
And that's where, you know, I think that a lot of people of faith kind of, they don't say that it's a test. Like, I think I'm the only one that says that. I mean, it sounds like a test to me, you know? Life is a test, because it's like there's clear ways to fail the test. There's clear ways not to go to heaven. There's clear ways not to have eternal life or whatever. And, you know, not to get too theological, but there's clear ways to live a good life and clear ways to not live a good life. So anything that encourages living a good life in such a way, in such a radical way, that it could catch the attention of an eternal being like a god, I mean, you got to be a pretty good guy to do something like that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's an interesting approach to it.
Yeah. So, if you're getting weirded out by all this like science, like thought and whatnot, just my last thing to say is just live your life as good as possible. And if you're good enough, maybe you will get pulled out of the simulation a little early. So that's my tip to you.
You get pulled out. And obviously we're just hypothesizing whether or not a simulation, if we're even living in a simulation at all. And that's so unlikely that.
Right. No, I don't think we're living in a simulation, but it's interesting to kind of bounce some ideas off of what that could be used for in the future for some good things.
Yeah, and I really thought it was interesting. I never looked at it from that lens before, and really thought about how it could possibly be used to better society or better oneself. So yeah, it seems like if we can develop this tech, or if we're living in the tech, it seems like this could be a very interesting situation.
Those were pretty much all my big thoughts. I guess, like, just for the sake that you're sharing this, to get some interaction, maybe there's some ideas that we didn't cover that maybe some other people have thought about, or maybe this kind of opened up the ideas for some people out there that may want to kind of elaborate on the ideas that have happened. Because most of my ideas are honestly just a little bit of tweaks off of media and ideas that I've already heard of. So maybe some of these ideas that we talk about here might, open up some ideas for you guys out there and be like, oh, whoa, actually, you're onto something really interesting. And I just so happen to work at MIT, and I think I'm going to, who knows?
Hey, if you have anything to add to the conversation, or if you have some questions, complaints, or any thoughts at all, feel free to reach out to the show at The Future Jam on Twitter, at The Future Jam on Instagram, and The Future Jam at gmail.com on your email. So send us messages, ideas, thoughts. We would love to have them, and maybe if you send us some things, maybe we'll bring that in and talk on it additionally, going off of this episode, like additional thoughts. So I want to thank Harrison for coming in and taking the time out of his busy work schedule and life. He's always doing something.
Great. You're doing a good job, man. I appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.